First, I'll just introduce everybody very quickly on the panel, and I'm going to go in alphabetical order, simply because that's the way I wrote it down. Will Files is a sound editor and mixer who's worked on Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which was a Golden Reel nominee. Also Brave, which I believe was the first Atmos film, is that correct? Star Trek Into Darkness and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Scott Gershon is a sound designer who has 10 Golden Reel Awards. That's quite an accomplishment, and 28 nominations. That's even more than I have, so I'm jealous. He worked recently on Pacific Rim, which was an Atmos mix, correct? And is a Golden Reel Award winner for both Gladiator and American Beauty, and also worked on Perfect Storm. David Gianmarco, who is also with us down at the end, is a re-recording mixer, sound designer. Are you both? Sound editor, sorry, thank you. Who did The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2, and 2 was both Atmos and Oro?
Yes, it was.
Yes. And also did Moneyball and 3:10 to Yuma, which were Oscar nominees. Congratulations. And we have Chris Jacobson with us, who's a sound designer at the Dub Stage, and has also worked on this very stage at Sony. And some of his credits include Oz the Great and Powerful, which was an Oro and Atmos upmix, as well as Hurt Locker and Spider-Man 3, which were both Golden Reel nominations. We also have Greg Russell with us, who is probably the most lauded mixer alive, with a whopping 16 Oscar nominations and 10 CAS Award nominations. You're much too young to have all of that.
God bless you.
And some of the phenomenal work he's done, Skyfall, one of my favorite mixes of all time. All 4 Transformers movies, including the most recent one, Age of Extinction, which was a native Atmos, is that correct? Yeah. And the first Spider-Man film. And finally, Mark Steckinger, who's a sound designer who has done Iron Man 3 in Atmos, and the 33 is about to come out, also native Atmos. Has done multiple Oscar-nominated films, Unstoppable, Star Trek, Face Off, Gladiator, which was a Golden Reel Award winner, and We Were Soldiers. So we're incredibly lucky to have this wealth of information coming from these people. I'm really happy that we started off the day with Randy's fantastic introduction, and ending it with Apocalypse Now is absolutely perfect in my opinion, because I think that's the first film that gave us what was going to become 5.1 sound, which was the first true immersive format in my opinion. We've upgraded it to 7.1 with splitting the surrounds more. Just about everybody mentioned they like the clarity of having more point sources to be able to create sound, and Will mentioned the front wide speakers, which I think help a lot. Just as a quick show of hands, how many people prefer 5 channels behind the screen instead of 3? It's interesting. It's split down the middle. One of you guys want to say why you prefer that?
It's just the accuracy of the panel. Yeah. You don't like things to jump.
Yeah, it's really nice when I find so often I'm putting something halfway between channels, and it's especially if it's dialogue. If it's coming out of an actual speaker, it sounds so much better, and it's literally the quality of its sound is better, and you're also going to the accuracy is going to track more clearly across the entire auditorium.
And I'd say also one caveat, depends on the size of the room.
Yes.
If it's a big, I'm thinking 5 across the front for big rooms.
Yeah, like a room like this.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I go back all the way to Born on the 4th, when I did 70 millimeter. We had 5 across the front, and I'd cut this whole gun battle where they're shooting, and I found that if I could place the guns on the 5 across the front, it just became clearer, and it became, you didn't need the phantom centers between left and center. All of a sudden, it just played really nicely. And again, it seems like the more speakers you have, the more articulation you get. Obviously, if a theater's not built correctly, you got to watch out for nodes and all the acoustical problems that more speakers create. But overall, in a good sounding room, it's just great.
Yeah, the one thing I really prefer about that is the fact that a lot of times most of the music is coming out left and right front, and most of the effects are coming out left and right front, and they just turn into a bloody mess when they're both big. And using the extra 2 channels to mix them gives more clarity. But Greg, you look like you wanted to say something.
No. I mean, never. I mean, I spent years here, 16 in fact, in this room and in the Cary Grant Theater, and we did, back with SDDS, 5 across the fronts. We did many films like that for years. But the reality for that was we were always asking how many theaters are actually playing the 5 across the front. So here I've spent 2 months pre-dubbing, pre-mixing doing everything with 5 across the fronts, and then I'm spending one day doing a print master where 99% of the people are going to hear it that way. And it was like, what are we doing? You know, so that's my only comment regarding that, is that, and especially in large-scale films where there's a lot of energy, that you're actually, and I always did love being able to put low-end components of an explosion in the inners and going wide with the crack, so there is more clarity. This 3 speakers aren't reproducing what 5 can do, and I get all that. But again, I'm always about compatibility and how this is going to translate all the way down the line. So that's my only reservation. Yeah.
Well, it seems like the nice thing about the object-based approach, of course, is that if the theater has 5, it'll use 5, and if the theater has 3, it'll just use 3.
Exactly,
so
right.
that it solves that problem in a much more elegant way than you probably had to do down mixes from 5 to
Exactly.
3, right? So
That's the case.
But you know, one thing I want to add to that, because you're absolutely right. I mean, the question is, what do I like better? But there is a reality, and that is even in all the Atmos and stuff, we made sure, like on Book of Life, because I said, look, reality is this movie's not going to come out on that many versions of Atmos, and it's going to live forever in probably 5.1. So what we made sure and we fought for is not to do the mix in one day. In other words, we did native Atmos. We did that. Then we said we need to spend the right amount of time that we need to make those adjustments to 5.1 format and 7.1 format, but really 5.1 format. Because, you know, unfortunately, sometimes a lot of our projects, they live in the theaters for 8 weeks, if we're lucky, 12 weeks, and they live the next 100 years, DVDs, downloadables, that's where everyone's going to see a lot of these films. And we got to make sure that those versions are exactly what we want as much as we wanted the other formats.
One more quick question before we open it up to the audience. Scott, you had mentioned that you recorded some stuff in the field in a bullfight. Is that what you said?
Yeah, in a bull ring.
In a bull ring.
Tijuana.
Do you think that we're going to see, not necessarily production, but field recording moving to more multi-channel setups? Because I'm still seeing most elements coming either in stereo or mono. Do you think we're going to move to 5.1 or beyond that in the field?
You know, for certain things, yes. On Pacific Rim, I took giant cargo containers and smashed them into each other, and we kind of dropped them, and we did those as multi-channel because we wanted to get the resonation and the resonation and the reverb because it was a massive sound. The problem is it's like an orchestra. The rooms that orchestras record in are great sounding rooms, and people fight for whether it's the stage here over at Sony or Abbey Road, and et cetera, et cetera. They want those places. I think what happens is that the moment you start recording sound effects and you want to be able to create the environment, you got to make sure the environment is exactly perfect. And sometimes that's easier said than done. I'm also a big fan of mono. Placed mono goes a long way as well. So instead of trying to create something that is perfectly placed and you've got to set up, we don't have the time. When we're outside recording, it's fast. Even though we have a lot of microphones, I don't know if it's ever been perfect to do all the acoustics, but I do like placed. I like placed mono, placed stereo, a lot of LCR recordings we've been doing a lot of, and then you can build that way. But the bull ring specifically, it just had amazing acoustics. I mean, there was no reverb on it. No reverb can do this. There was such amazing echoes that we had DPA 5100 mics. I don't want to get too technical, but we had multi-channel mics that we placed in multiple places up to be able to get that great acoustics because we really fought for that place.
Anyone else want to talk about multi-channel field recording? Yeah, Mark.
Well, it's sort of the same thing. It's like if you're going to record something and you want to master that space or recreate it, that's one thing for multi-channel. But frequently, as we all know, we're moving it around.
Yeah.
We're making it into something else. And you really want something a little bit more simplistic, more placeable, more specific, really. Because we all know that the greatest track is something that has movement, flow, pitch shift, change to it. So you're going to be moving things around a lot. So it's either you're going to master a sound or you're going to have a sound that you're going to put into the theater environment and how you're going to do that. That's kind of where I would personally draw that line.
I think even to the end that it's so seldom in these kinds of films that we're actually trying to recreate reality. What we're actually trying to do is create a alternate reality or an augmented reality, hyper reality. it's not literally, it's not a documentary. So it's so seldom that we want to just have a single 5.0 or 7.0 ambience recording out in the field. It would never suffice. We need to create layers of sounds. So if I usually I'll often have a different thing in the front and in the middle of the room and in the back of the room and on the ceiling, because you're trying to create something that's expansive.
Also, I'll say one thing is a good part of our job, everybody here, especially the effects mixers, is to focus the audio. And it's very difficult. I'll even use, I'm going to Pacific Rim. It was a 3-ring circus. There were so many things going on. We had rain, we had creatures, and the whole point was, you kind of build it, and then you kind of get rid of a lot of it, because you figure out, okay, I've got all the elements, but what part, in this specific moment, what do I want to say? What story do I want to say? How do I strip it out so I want the audience in any given time to focus on a specific thing? And then you make that dynamic and you weave it so you're never stuck on any one sound. But really, I think being able to scale it back to simplicity, because the movie's there more than everywhere else.
Okay, so we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. Tom has a microphone. There's somebody behind you, Tom?
I got your microphone. Yeah, hello. There you go. I guess this would be mostly for Greg, but I was wondering, in the placement of dialogue, when you're doing that in Atmos, I noticed on the Planet of the Apes movie, it seemed that all the dialogue and the effects on the dialogue was still coming from the center channel. And I guess for the M&Es, you have to do that, where you're just going to, change it into French or whatever. But Greg, do you find yourself being able to place the dialogue and having the ambience in the room beyond complete, separate whatever 9-1 bed? Or do you have to still make it just come out of the center, even with the ambience?
Well, Will was a part of Planet of the Apes, so I don't know if you're referring to.
Well, it's a question for both. I know that you're doing a lot of dialogue, and I know that.
Actually, I'm the sound effects mixer, and Scott Milan is my dialogue partner. But normally the reverbs are out of the center for the most part, unless they're just trying to if they're matching a reflection with ADR in production and so forth. But usually verbs are kind of wider and within the room a bit. So at least that's what all the fellas that I've had the privilege of working with through the years, try to get an expansive feel within a decay of some kind, rather than straight down the middle.
It's a tricky thing with production sound. When you're doing a movie that has sound recorded on set, it always comes with a lot of sound behind it, background sound, whatever cars driving by. And so it becomes very tricky to move the sound around behind the screen, because you really feel it move, because it's not just the voice. So in general, I think, rules are meant to be broken, but it's definitely very often the case that the dialogue stays more or less in the center channel on production sound films. Animated films, the ambience around it, well, the ambience around it, like Greg was saying, it's going to be centered around the voice itself. A lot of times dialogue mixers will use a mono reverb and then a multi-channel reverb also, because you want to anchor it behind the voice so it sounds like it's coming from that space, but then you want to let it wrap around the room a little bit as well. So on Planet of the Apes, for example, Andy Nelson used some multi-channel delays. A lot of the film was outside, so you do actually hear it bouncing around the room a little bit, but the majority of the sound is still going to come more or less from the center channel.
And I've actually found that since we've moved predominantly to radio mics on production dialogue, that I'm adding reverb almost to every shot in every scene to try and make it not sound like a radio mic. And that gives me the control of deciding whether I want an entire scene to have a 5.1 reverb on it to make it sound like they're in an auditorium or something. So I think we're probably going to continue to see more use of multi-channel reverbs rather than putting it all on the screen.
And the reverbs are expanding now. I mean, has anybody used there's like the Phoenix Verb will do, 11.1 now. I mean, there's like
Right.
a lot of these
Great
reverbs
reverb.
are really growing.
We have one over here.
Hi, my name is Dale Crowley, and I'm a composer. And my question is, what kind of advice and direction would you give to composers that are having to compose now for RO and for Atmos.
Write beautiful themes.
That's it.
And I'll throw one thing also in there, as a sound designer, is, I've had the great opportunity of working with a lot of composers on the movies that I do. I really hate when we go to the mix and we haven't spoken. Because all of a sudden it goes, okay, everybody's gone to 110%. And then you go in and the problem is it's never woven. You have to do compromises. I love it where if I'll go to you, what are you doing on the scene? And you go, I think I got a contrabass. Well, then I'm going to probably stay away from a low-end rumble. Or if you're going to go, I'm going to do high-end strings. Well, maybe I'll hit the sub and I'll rumble the room a little bit because you're not there. And the more we could create a tapestry and kind of a ballet together between composers and the sound designers and the people that create the sound for the movie, the better off the movie will be.
I think
Having the music come from different parts of the theater, if you're sitting on the left side or the right side.
Well, I think how it's happening a lot these days is what's happening for the Atmos mixes and Oro mixes is that we're taking what was in the left and right and we're pulling it off the screen just a little bit. And it's not necessarily being mixed for that format, although I know Dennis Sands has done some scoring mixes specifically in Atmos where he's gone ahead and placed objects that then that metadata comes to the mix stage as a starting point. But I think, in general, a lot of mixes are still being done in 5.1. I know some are being done in 7.1, and I know there's been a couple at least where they've incorporated ceiling microphones in their scoring sessions as well. But I think it's still, like Greg said, it's kind of still basics. It's make it sound great, make it, catch your ear. And I think one big thing, as effects guys, one thing that's annoying with some music that comes in on the stage is if the composer has hit every action beat with music, you're kind of screwed because we're obligated also, if something blows up on screen, we're kind of obligated to put a sound there, right? So it's not one of these things where like you have to pick, who wins in that situation because the reality is everyone loses, right?
I've always said, I guess they thought we weren't going to hit that explosion.
Right, exactly. And it's just like, well, what do you think we're going to do?
And you'll find that a lot of the experienced composers will actually drop out.
Exactly.
Ba-da-da-da-da, down,
Yeah.
down, and then they do the theme.
It's
Love
always
that.
better to
Love
react
that.
to it rather than play it.
You know?
Or come in after it's finished, yeah.
And Book of Life, we had over 100 music tracks. And we were able to place it and it was great because we could put the choirs a little bit further back. Gustavo did the music, and there's some parts where they sing because it's animated, And we can really dry it out because what they did was when they mixed it because they liked the records and that kind of vibe. And it was really reverberant, and it's like hit the recording, and it felt like a studio when we went from dialogue to that person singing. So what we did was we dried it out. So now all of a sudden it was much more intimate. It was much more where you felt that character just naturally started singing, and then we evolved it in. So, there's things that you find on a dubbing stage that's unique and that you may not find in the recording studio.
Chris, do you want to talk about the delivery on Oz? I know the tracks were pretty wide on that.
Yeah. Oz was very wide. It was hundreds of tracks actually. It's 5.1
For just the
7.1s,
music.
You name it, for just music. And they also did put up mics for the Oro as well, so we had the upper mics to work with as well. So it could be as simple as just putting up mics to record the height information, and also having splits is really a good way to go because you can take the choir, for instance, and pull it back into the room. Or certain elements that you want to pull back into the room or up above you or wherever. But in general, I'd say most point source stuff is going to stay in the front and you're going to have the reflections coming all around you.
The only other thing I would say to composers is just remember that the re-recording mixer is your friend. They're part of your team, and treat them that way and take them out to lunch and get to be friendly with them. Because I see
Especially
so many
the effects
times
guys.
I see so many times the composer walks on the stage assuming that the mixer is the enemy and that they're somehow going to ruin the score. If you have that mindset from the beginning, it's never going to work out well.
A panel this afternoon on music and dialogue, specifically with Dennis Sands will be there. We had another question right here?
This is a question for Mark. You gave the example of getting the impulse reverb recording settings. when you went to reproduce those various impulse reverbs, how did you set that up? Did you take separate reverbs and then pan those to the appropriate places, or how did you then deal with the results of that?
Well, I was going to say, truth be told, haven't done that yet. But the plan is to have different reverb boxes that will go to different parts of the room based on the impulse response that hopefully modeled that space. So if you want something to feel like it's reflecting mainly from the back of you, that's where you're going to put most of you're going to send there more than you would in another part of the room. That's the idea. Whether it works that way, I'm not so sure. But we plan on trying to do this as an object-based thing, so we can actually put it in different spots of the room and actually kind of park it in a space. So instead of being a bed that's really specifically on the wall, it might be an object that's just sitting maybe a little bit above and a little bit in back, and maybe another reverb send will be another one that's maybe more towards the side, the left side or the right side. So that's the intent. Whether it actually is effective, works that way, or the audience perceives that, or it's effective for us in facilitating the mix, I'm not quite sure yet, but I do think it will work. So.
Just to play a bit of devil's advocate here, you guys were talking before about 5 across the front versus 3 across the front and the 90% of the audiences. We have a handful of theaters across the country that are in Atmos, and your mixes are playing for a week. How do you feel about the time that you're spending on them versus the amount of the audience that's actually getting to see them?
Well, obviously, I think we'd all wish that there was
The
more of them.
premiere is going to be awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to a certain extent, there's a lot of what is done here for this sort of venue environment in the professional community. Let's be honest about that. It'd be great to open it up to find out how many theaters can actually play these various formats. And I think almost more importantly, is the general audience aware that they even exist? Something that they would search out that they care about. Any of my friends who are not part of this business, they have no clue about Barco or Dolby Atmos or what that means, or if they even care to hear about it, what the difference is. So it would be great if the audience cared about it, or if the audience could have a way to like A/B, I don't want to say A/B a test, but if you were walking into a 3D theater and you didn't have glasses, you'd be pretty aware that it's a little different from your normal movie-going experience. And it would be pretty fantastic to find a way to demonstrate that sonically as well. Obviously, it's not that dramatic, but nonetheless, I think there's a way through some great, let's say, Atmos teasers that Will did, which helped me to do Atmos on the 33, as a matter of fact. Thank you very much. So, but nonetheless, I think the audience needs to understand the benefits of what we're all discussing here.
But I'm afraid they never will, which in a way it's like, you know, the thing is, sound is the invisible art, right? So it has an upside and a downside. The downside is no one really knows or cares what we do. The upside of it is that it allows us to manipulate them in a way that they don't understand we're doing, right? So that's a huge upside, and I actually wouldn't trade one for the other. I kind of like it the way it is. And I think that to answer your question more specifically, no one's ever going to go see a movie just because of the sound. Maybe the only movie that ever would have been an exception for that was maybe Star Wars, when surround sound was first a big deal, but that was also because that was a great movie and it had great sounds in it. In a great mix too, but you know, very few people are going to go to a movie theater because it has a sound system in it. But what they'll hopefully walk out thinking is, man, that movie was awesome. That was such an amazing experience. Like, I want to go and do that again in a movie theater. And I think anything we can do to make people come see movies in movie theaters is a really great thing. And there's also an argument to be said for doing things at the highest common denominator, even though 90% of the people might hear it in 7.1 or 5.1. I know the choices that I make when I'm mixing in a native Atmos mix do translate down the line to 7.1 and 5.1, even to the LTRT. I find that I make better decisions when I hear things more clearly.
Yeah,
I
just
totally-
to add to that, with the Oro, it is a 11.1 down mixed into a 5.1, and so we do find, if we do the 5.1 first and then go to the 11.1, we'll make enhancements to the 11.1 that actually translate into the 5.1 that we prefer. Right. And also, regarding theaters, that number is growing literally weekly. There's new installations going up. And I know Cinemark, for instance, packages it as their XD theaters. They don't necessarily promote the Oro aspect of it, but they promote it as this immersive sound as part of their big screen experience that maybe a lot of people don't know but subconsciously it is a better experience for them.
Yeah, I live in Denver now, and within driving distance of my home, there are 3 Atmos theaters. And I do know, granted, I teach students who are into this, but they go out of their way to go to those theaters. It is frustrating that movies get in that theater for 1 week and then get bumped by whatever the next big release is, so you have to go see it immediately. But I do think market saturation is going to just continue to increase, and Denver's like the 18th biggest market. So to have 3 in the 18th biggest market, I think says we're seeing penetration.
Also, I think we're living in the land of convenience, or the time of convenience. And the question is, how do we inconvenience you to go to a theater, get out of your house, because you already bought that latest Samsung 70-inch, 80-inch, 100-inch, whatever. And the whole point is we try to make experiences, because when you do see, especially the good theaters that are bright and they're calibrated correctly and the sound's done, it's a wonderful experience. And also, it's an experience with other people. That when you laugh and there's a group think that happens in a theater that doesn't happen at home. So I think that when you look at the technology that's coming up both visually and audibly, how do we get people back into the theaters? How do we keep them going? How do we get the young people to get off their iPads and iPhones and actually see it on one of these?
One over there.
So, as I understand it, Atmos and Oro 3D have a slightly different speaker setup. How is that? So you have to mix the movie twice, as I understand it, for the 2 formats. How is that? Is that easy, or is it?
There are ways to convert it, actually. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're mixing it multiple times. We're doing 7.1, we're doing 5.1, we're doing stereo, we're doing home theater versions of all those. We're doing 11.1, we're doing Atmos. I mean, we are mixing multiple times, and that's just, I don't think there's really a way around it. I mean, there are ways to, like you said, to convert one to the other.
But
Let's spend as much time.
Let's face it, post schedules are not getting bigger, and they're getting smaller and more condensed. So Will said it well. I really was impressed with the down mixing, mixing in native Atmos, and what the 7.1 became of that with the 5.1 and so forth, as well as the Oro taking the object-based stuff, content, and we rendered when we did the 5.1, we have a rendered object stem that we put in the upper 5.0, and it worked really well. And then we augmented some other things that we kind of wanted to get up top as well. On that particular film, the robots are very tall, and they talk a lot. And so, Scott Milan basically had an option to play them out of the lower LCRs or tip them up top. And so that was very effective for that. But it didn't take, we did that process relatively quickly. So, again, it's this compatibility that we're speaking to. And I was very impressed with the trickle-down effect.
I think the bulk of your work, the
Was done.
EQing, the levels,
Was
the
done.
reverbs, all that stuff is already done at that point.
Exactly.
It does go quicker.
But we do spend a lot of time on versions, almost as much time as we spend mixing.
David?
We had done the same thing with Spider-Man. We did it natively in Atmos and then had to do the Oro mix. And the technology we have was able to take a lot of our work, and we did it like Greg did.
We stole it from you.
Transformers. We took that stuff, and then, we can alter it, and the Atmos sounded great. It really, the Oro sounded great. It was very close to what we were used to hearing in the Atmos. We liked it. We made the tweaks to make it be the film that our director walked away with. And then that 11.1 Oro was going to fold down to a 5.1 that was going to go out everywhere. And so we wanted to make sure that 5.1 sounded well. And that 11.1 to 5.1 also sounded great, and we made our tweaks with it, and you can do it pretty quickly.
There is a panel later today where you're going to hear directly from Dolby and Barco and DTS, so you'll learn more about the differences between the formats. I think we have one more question.
I have a question about conventions in panning. I know when kind of surround came out, everybody kind of played with, oh, this is great, you know, we'll put dialogue over here and we'll throw this over there. And what they found is that instead of creating more of an immersive environment for the audience, it kind of misdirected the attention outside of the screen, which actually pulled them out of the experience. Now that you have more spatial accuracy and you have I don't know, a deeper or a wider depth of field per se, have you found that there are any experiments that you have done as effects mixers? And specifically, I love your suspense work, so I'm curious to see how you deal with maybe, was Oculus and was that Atmos or Barco? Or is it, if there's any experiments that you guys have done that you found, all right, that sounded like a good idea, but it doesn't work so well. It makes you know, pulls you out of the experience. It actually doesn't enhance it.
Happens all the time. Yeah. I mean, you know, we experiment, we play with this. This is a collaboration. We have a lot of people in the room making suggestions, and we're working together to try new things. But as Randy spoke so eloquently about the fact that this is storytelling, it's on the screen. Anything that's distracting from the characters and the fundamental story is a problem, and we really have to regulate that and be cognizant of that at all times. At all times. If any time you're in here and now you've lost what's happening on screen, it's a problem. But I think we all agree.
Good taste still applies.
And also, just in the room, things that were objects and worked as an object off the screen, for me sitting right there, it sounded right. But for somebody sitting off axis, it may not on particular sound. So that was something we were conscious of too while we were working. It was like pulling things back in.
Did it got more difficult in general, or did not as a result of the Atmos or Barco, the more immersive?
You just have to use your instincts and you know, look, again, we've all been doing this a really long time, and from mono to where we are now, and the basic blending of sounds and you know, the basic mix ideas are still in place.
And a lot of times we found, again, I just finished Book of Life last week, so that's what's in my head, is that when we first did the Atmos version, we kind of went, okay, because we didn't really go too crazy with it. It just felt right. And we didn't really realize what we had until we went to 5.1. And then we're like, oh, okay, that's 5.1.
You get used to it very quickly.
You get very used to it because we used it in very subtle ways. We built the music around it. We built the Bee Gees around it. Things moved up and down, but it wasn't gimmicky. It just felt like that's where the movie, it felt like in the zone, felt in the pocket right. And then we went to 5.1. We were like, oh, and then I totally agree because we pushed the music off into those, you know, front, right, and left, that when we brought it back, it just had a different sound. And that's where we'd spend a little more time, just a little massage, not much, just to kind of get it back onto the screen.
Yeah, with horror films in particular, it's different because you don't have a lot of stuff flying over your head and going around you, behind you. It's more of a mood that you want to create. Drones and, what's that?
You misdirect with space.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing drones, and I mean, there are opportunities for stuff to go up above and behind you and this and that, but really, the action is happening on screen, and you're just trying to create a feel, you know.
Do you guys find that 3D cinema has helped us pull things off the screen more, or do you still do a separate 3D mix?
We've basically been mixing in 3D for 20 years.
Exactly.
Also, the problem is we don't ever see the 3D until after the mix is done.
Right.
Sometimes.
Okay. Tom, I think we're out of time. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you all so much. This was a fantastic
Thank you.
panel. Proud to be a part of it.